Actually, before you plug, sorry, it's temperamental as hell. So we can just get you up, plug it in, wait for it to actually like recognize it, and then whack the HDMI in, which you're doing. I don't know why it matters, but it does. Initialization routines.
Can I take it back? I'll put it there. So you can see it right here. And just quick question, how much time do you need to
get started?
Yeah.
Oh, I'm ready now.
You're ready now, okay.
As soon as this one's set.
Yeah, what's your time check?
11:01. 15 minutes ago. Yeah, okay. There are seats at the front. Can they hear us? Yeah. So the next section is about to start in 30 seconds. I am your track one host.
Tell them.
For folks at the back, there are seats at the front. Okay, I'm your track one host. My name is Angus Chen, and our section is about to start. So today's speaker, Cassandra Young, and the title is Skills to Build for Your Cloud Security Career. Again, skills to build for your cloud security career. Let's welcome Cassandra Young.
All right, this headphone thing is really weird. So can you hear me? Can you hear me in the back? Yes, this is awesome. So I'm Cassandra. I do a couple things in the cloud security space, and I'm here to tell you how the hell I got here and some skills that translate really well if you're looking to either get into cloud security from IT or from the security space in general. So let's get started. That's my intro slide. I'm going to talk about my career, but right now I am a senior consultant at CrowdStrike. We have a services consulting kind of department. So I do proactive cloud security assessments, which means I get to go into an environment with read-only access, tear it to pieces, and then yell at executives and get paid to do it. That's my job. It's awesome. 10 of 10 would recommend. I also have a master's in computer science from University of Pennsylvania, where I used to work, and I see a whole bunch of my former colleagues here. I also used to work at an awesome company called SRA, which is the first consulting firm I worked at, which I'll talk about that too, but there's some great folks from there too, so see everyone. I'm sure there's CrowdStrikers too, maybe, but there's like 5 that I even know are even remotely near Philly, so we'll see. And then I'm a director at Blue Team Village as well. If you're not familiar, we work mostly at DEF CON to provide free Blue Team security, training and resources at DEF CON, so check us out. So to get started, we're going to talk about a couple different kinds of technical skills that are pretty much necessary for transitioning into cloud security. Depends on what you're interested in cloud security, but some of those technical skills that really make a big difference are just understanding Linux and being really comfortable with command line tools. So if you're used to, remoting into a Windows box and clicking a bunch of things, most of the cloud resources that I deal with in enterprise environments don't really use that kind of interface. So you need to be comfortable with your command line skills. You need to understand how to run command line only tools on remote servers, essentially. Virtualization, if you don't understand virtualization, it's really hard to wrap your brain around anything cloud, so make sure that you're really comfortable in that space as well. Having some knowledge of containers and roughly how they work is great. I don't really deal with a lot of kind of data plane level. Like I'm not remoting into servers very frequently, not configuring containers that directly. But having an idea of how they're used helps a lot, because you'll deal with a lot of companies that are using very advanced containerized infrastructure, Kubernetes, things like that in the cloud. And having just a base knowledge of how those work is incredibly important. And then the other really important set of skills is basic networking. And you'll notice I say basic and I have an asterisk in it, because if you're really good at on-premise networking and you go to the cloud, it's not going to work the way you think it's going to work. So having fundamental skills like understanding protocols, you're good with TCP/IP, you know what TLS is, you know TCP versus UDP, things like that. Like that's the kind of level of fundamental knowledge that you need. Roughly how subnets work, how networks are divided and segmented. So having that base networking experience is great, but don't rely on it too much, because you'll need that flexibility to really move into a cloud environment where it works completely differently than you think it does. And every cloud provider does it differently, so that makes it even more confusing. And then lastly, firewall rules. Really important that you understand how firewall rules work, because the cloud is kind of inherently public in a lot of ways, and you'll see a lot of different tools in different cloud environments that control how connections are made to resources within that environment. So understanding how you would configure a rule. What is a stateful, what is stateful or stateless? How does that work? So, you have traffic egressing and it makes a connection. Well, that allows traffic to come back in. So you need to understand those fundamentals to really be able to do this. So some other skills, I get a lot of people asking me if they need to know how to write applications in Python. I would say no, that's a bonus. But you definitely need good, just command line basic scripting skills. Bash, really useful across AWS, GCP, Azure less so. Microsoft Azure, it's Microsoft, so having PowerShell experience. If you have PowerShell experience, you're going to be really comfortable in the command line, and then that would make sense as a transfer into cloud security. So network and application connectivity, I wasn't really sure how to word this. It's kind of like, essentially the cloud resources are different services that you don't have much control of that are stitched together with APIs. So if you're not familiar with an API, you don't know how it works, that's going to be really hard to wrap your brain around. So working with APIs, understanding HTTP requests and connections, kind of understanding how you would build request headers is going to help you a lot in understanding how traffic moves between the different resources in the cloud. So definitely recommend that. I'm adding the software development and automation side as a bonus. Like, this is more advanced stuff. If you haven't heard of infrastructure as code, if you don't know, what Terraform is, or even, if you don't work a lot with like Ansible and Chef and Puppet and these like orchestration kind of tools, it's helpful to know that, because in my experience, the vast majority of cloud environments I've worked with for my client engagements have used some level of that type of tooling. CI/CD pipelines, Git, definitely know Git. I would actually put that under core skills. And then, CI/CD pipelines, again, infrastructure as code, more of that container orchestration. It's going to help you a lot. And personally, in my job, I actually write tools to pull configuration data from cloud providers. And I'm using Python to do that. And I have a good application understanding of software development. That has helped me get jobs. It has helped me grow in my current role, and it keeps it interesting and exciting, and it's a huge bonus. It sets me apart from other candidates. So I wasn't really sure how to put together like a security-specific list of skills, because I think that the vast majority of them are transferable. But the real key here, I think, is just understanding identity and access management. So this is identity federation. Every major cloud provider has there's going to be some type of federation set up behind it. You have like Okta backing AWS or Azure AD, Entra ID now, whatever, if you want to call it that. They rename it every 5 seconds, I guess. But understanding how that implementation works. The majority of environments that I've seen in Azure specifically are on-prem environment with Active Directory, simple Active Directory setup, federates into Azure Active Directory or Entra ID, and that backs all of the permissions that are configured in Azure, in the Azure platform. So understanding the fundamentals of how that works is incredibly useful, and I would almost say that's like really core knowledge that you need to have. Authentication flows, types, just understanding how sessions and token-based authentication work, that type of stuff, also very useful. Just understanding like the difference between like service accounts and user accounts, interactive, non-interactive logins, things like that is very helpful. And then DFIR related skills, like having a good understanding of log analysis. Cloud logs are scary. They're massive, not gonna lie. Like I've described them as basically like the default is a fire hose, and you're gonna get like way too much information. So understanding how to like look through logs and narrow down different parts of a log, like an event type or IP addresses and things like that is really helpful. SIM and log monitoring infrastructure. I don't want to say SIM because that sometimes is a little bit more like broad and expensive if you're using Splunk, of course. But just understanding how a logging pipeline is set up is very helpful as well. And then being able to do some kind of threat hunting, having familiarity of that process, also very useful. And then application code pipeline security. If you've done AppSec, if you've been involved in DevSecOps, it translates really well to cloud. So I put together a few examples, and you'll note the giant asterisks on the bottom. Yeah, job descriptions don't usually mean shit. Job titles don't mean shit. Like, I was trying to look at listings on, like, Indeed or something last night. Like, okay, what does a cloud security engineer do? Whatever. Like, who knows? It's just like the company just rolled the dice and picked a bunch of things that sounded very fancy and put it on a job description. Then the pay ranges, too, are just, like, all over the place. So I can't really speak to that exactly. But generally speaking, an engineer is going to be involved in more the implementation side of things. They may also act as kind of an interface between the security team and something like the developer team, and cloud infrastructure engineering teams, things like that. So it's really, I would say if you have a lot of IT experience, this is a great kind of position to go for. It'll be a little bit more hands-on. It doesn't necessarily need the same level of technical depth that an architect would. So on the right I put architect. That's really around like looking at things from a much higher level perspective, understanding how how you translate OUs on-prem to organizations in AWS or the other infrastructure, the way that you kind of organize an environment that would apply to the other cloud platforms. And really, it's like architecture is more developing strategies around things, and you need the technical depth to be able to do that. So if you're targeting any one position, engineers are probably a good place to start if you have that security experience. Probably even if you have some of the IT experience. If you have IT experience but not any security experience, then it may be, you may be targeting something that's a little bit more, starter level, like generic security career. And then I'm personally in consulting. I love consulting, but my God, you need to be completely willing to jump into the deep end, be confused all the time, and have your brain hurt like hell at the end of the day. I think one of the first like consulting engagements I was on, it was like, oh, this is going to run for like a couple weeks to a month, and they put up like architecture diagrams of their cloud environment. I'm like, I'm so overwhelmed right now. I don't know what any of these things mean. I think like we recorded meetings and I would like play them over like 3 times to understand all the words, and then like write down the acronyms and Google things. It was nuts. So consulting is a lot of fun if you have the bandwidth for that. If you have flexibility, if you're just willing to like lose your mind a little bit, it's a great way to get started. But it is very challenging to do. And I can say, so I work at CrowdStrike right now, and we're eventually going to be expanding our team to get more cloud assessment folks. And some of the things that we look for are going to be a little bit more higher level. So we're going to look for experience with like threat hunting cloud, and maybe more of the like actual cloud engineering, people with a lot of hands-on experience. So that's definitely comes in there. And then there are other roles too. Like I would say, if you just search for cloud on Indeed or whatever, or your job sites, what you're going to find is almost every regular security position references cloud. So if you have some security experience and aren't ready to hyper-focus on cloud, you find something that actually has a cloud element where it's, cloud skills preferred, or you'll be handling a lot of this, and then you can use that as a way to just build that experience up over time. So the other question I get a lot is which cloud should I go with? And this is a great question. I love not answering it, honestly. It's so subjective. But I was kind of thinking about this and like, well, I started with AWS. And the reason I started with AWS is because when I did my master's in computer science, I got to just like put projects in the cloud, and AWS was like the most documented, the most widely used. It's every place probably has AWS if they have anything. So it's kind of an easy thing to transition into. But if you already have experience with on-prem AD, if you have IAM experience, if you've ever been a Windows sysadmin, honestly, I would probably pick Azure and or M365. So that's your Office 365 kind of suite of services where you're not really spinning up, VMs or anything, but you're configuring platforms. And honestly, that's a really good segue into Azure. So if you get that M365 experience, it's like Azure's like right there. So it's kind of like you can use it as a pivot point. And then IAM also, if you really like IAM, I mean, M365 is great. Work with Entra ID, Azure AD, whatever you want to call it. And that's a pretty easy transition point. And then my favorite one, if you're a masochist, pick GCP. Guess who's a masochist? I actually work in all three cloud platforms, and I kind of like GCP the most because no one else knows what the hell it is and what it does. And it's really fun to just be the person that's like, this is weird. Let me figure out what the hell's going on here. It's a lot of fun. And then there's other ones like Alibaba Cloud, and I don't even know the others. Oracle Cloud, really fucking weird. Don't touch Oracle Cloud. Their like claim to security fame is literally, oh, our VMs are like network perimetered. And the thing about cloud is it's all IAM. So your network perimeter doesn't really mean shit to me. And that's their whole thing. And then they say lift and shift. It's bad. Don't do lift and shift. Anyway, the other question I get a lot that I also hate answering is certifications. Folks, I hate certifications. I think they're really dumb, and I have several. I still think they're dumb. But what I actually do recommend is especially if your job is willing to pay for a certification, like if they're willing to pay for any kind of cloud cert, go for it. Like, that's fine. But I actually like using some resources from studying for those certifications to essentially look at like what areas I'm good at. So I did an Azure certification. I looked, and there's like a whole section that's just about Azure AD at the time. And that was great because I was looking at that. I'm like, okay, what parts of this like little review am I confused about? And then I can focus on those and round out the skill sets. Or they'll talk about, kind of like your VMs, your storage, like S3 and AWS, for example. Really great way to just assess where you are and then like drill down a little bit. So they're very useful. Honestly, I mostly recommend if you're going to get a certification, especially if you're paying for your own money or paying with your own money, I would recommend just sticking to the platform certs. So your AWS certifications, GCP, if you really feel like going down that road. And then Azure has a number of good ones as well. They almost all have entry-level ones, which are great. I don't say that they're going to differentiate you in a pile of applicants. They're not necessarily great for that, but they're a great entryway into just having something that's going to get you flagged by a recruiter. Like someone's going to search for that and find it, and then it might help you get just like one step further in the application process. And then there's some other ones as well. If you have a lot more experience, there are, cloud security focused certs that are more applicable if you have a lot of security experience already. Training resources, I'm a big fan of doing anything that's free or covered by your employer already. Again, the trainings provided by the cloud provider really very helpful. They provide pretty thorough study guides for those certifications that you can use as general resources. Heard good things about A Cloud Guru. And then Udemy usually they'll have like a fire sale on like Black Friday, so you get these courses for like $5. Great intro, quality, maybe a little hit or miss, but it's really just great to be able to kind of, that'll get you started, and then you'll figure out like what's interesting, what do you want to focus on next, that kind of thing. And then I'll post these slides on my GitHub afterwards, but I also got some colleagues to recommend some links, so these will be on the slide deck that I upload. So the last slide I'm going to do, or the last major slide, is my own path into cloud security, because I can talk about this because I've literally done it. So I started out working in higher ed as generic IT desktop support. Yeah, desktop support. I see you people I used to work with. And man, I didn't know anything. I think I couldn't figure out how to turn Wi-Fi on Windows 7, which was kind of sad, but I learned. I also made the interesting decision to help with an O365 migration when no one else wanted to touch it, because I was like, I don't know anything. Let me just use this. So the connections I built and the knowledge that I acquired helping with that helped me move into a position at Central IT that was a Windows sysadmin position. So I basically went from generic desktop support, help desky stuff to Windows sysadmin, just because I was willing to actually just embrace O365 and deal with it. So from there, I also got a master's in computer science, which I did one class at a time over 7 years for a 2-year program. I used my tuition benefit because I worked at a university. That's another recommendation. Higher ed, there are other benefits besides the minimal pay. So definitely hear some laughs from that one. But while I was doing that master's in computer science, I also used every opportunity to just study cloud and try to use it, get hands-on. And then I moved into my first consulting position. I actually wound up doing Azure engineering for an XDR service that we created. And that was a great pivot because I went from O365 and M365 services, cloud experience with the masters, and then used that to focus on Azure. And then I moved into AWS cloud assessments afterwards. And then my last pivot, I moved to CrowdStrike, and I do mostly Azure and GCP assessments, proactive assessments, but I also advise on other exercises like tabletops. We do some purple team exercises, threat hunting, cloud, things like that. So that's kind of the progression that I took, and I used a lot of those skills that I had focused on to build up to that point. And then my last real slide here, just some tips and tricks. Be flexible, be willing to learn. That is absolutely number one. You have to be that person that's I don't know what this is. Let me go figure it out. Because a lot of people are really afraid to make that move, or afraid to change their mindset, or afraid to embrace that they don't know something. And that's also another important part of that as well. Getting hands-on. AWS has free tier. GCP and Azure have their free resources as well, so use them. They're great. And then I think, human networking too. Go to conferences, meet people, talk to people. Cloud meetups, security meetups, just start talking. Talk to me after here. I'll be somewhere over there probably, in the back, maybe in the hallway. Might go to the hallway. So get a little nuts in here. And then the last one I'll say is just apply for the job. I mean, worst it can say is no, so don't sell yourself short. Really focus on all the skills that you have that can transition. You have base knowledge. You can apply that. You can learn something new. You're golden. That's all I want out of anyone that I am involved in hiring. So with that, that's it. Thank you very much. So I don't think I can take questions up here. Can I take them out in the hallway? So I'm going to go out to the hallway for Q&A. I'll be out there in a second. And there's my GitHub is on there. I'm on all the socials as Muteki mostly. So find me. Thank you so much.